one thing that is to the forefront, the Celtics, who were championship contenders, ended up having their head coach, Ime Udoka, suspended for a year after a months-long investigation by an outside law firm. It's interesting because we had different reports. At first, a report came out, then it was scrubbed, and then something else just said violation of team rules, no elaboration of what those team rules are. But now the Celtics are in an interesting position. Where do you think the Celtics' chances are for win the championship stand now?
They're worse than they were, and it's not going to get easier for them. I mean, I'm not going to go into details I've heard, but talking to people around the league and sources, it's a messy situation. It is an ugly situation, and I think their concern is, and a legitimate one, is that bits and pieces start to leak out, and this story never really dies, and it just keeps bothering. It's a distraction all season long for a team with Joe Mazzulla now, the head coach. This was a championship, like you said, it's a championship contender taken over by a popular assistant coach, but a guy whose only head coaching experience is at D2 level. Like, it's a huge ask for this guy to come in and take over for Ime Udoka, who had not only spent a lot of years on NBA benches and was an NBA player, but really coalesced this team last year, got them to buy into the system they were playing. Corey, to me, I just have a lot more questions about them. They're still loaded with talent, but I mean, what about you? I don't think you can look at them quite the same way right now.
I will say there is an interesting trend happening in the NBA. First-year head coaches, performing pretty well. Udoka is an example of that. Frank Vogel, like when he first started going into the Lakers, he had some, nice success early, Dixon Kidd as well. So I do think that we don't know what exactly could happen. He's been around the organization for a few years now. Mazzulla, Marcus Smart seems to have a big vote of confidence in there. He understands the system. He understands what it means to be a Boston Celtic. That's all good and well. I do think that this team, since they started off the season horribly, I mean, you and I remember this.
Yes,
the Celtics were not good pre-All-Star break. They were just not good. And then they went from being a middling team, 500 or sub 500, to then going on this tear that I thought was a tear, and ended up they just ripped the whole book out, burned it, and then threw it outside the window. I was like, it's over. The Celtics are like one of the best teams in the NBA. It's a new era. I think that alone brought this team together. And as long as Jason Tatum, who is the head there, he's the head dog, he's the alpha. If he says, look, I absolutely believe that we can win the championship still, then I think that there's still hope there because the team dynamic, I think, is still strong. So I do think it's not going to be as big of a drop as we are expecting.
There might be early, though. Remember, they're also now out. Robert Williams had his knee operated on again, and they're like 2 to 3 months this time. Like, he's going to be out for a bit. Part of what helped that midseason turnaround was giving him more minutes, putting him in the middle, right? Like making him a defensive anchor for them, along with, Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year, but they were almost a tag team of perimeter and paint. And not having Robert Williams out there to start the season, it's just, if they get off to a slow start again, I think it's just going to be tougher to rally this time around. We'll see.
I agree with you there. I agree with you. I 100% agree. But if Robert Williams can get healthy, if they take the approach that we always use, like the gold standard, right? Currently, it's the Warriors. If they take the approach that the Warriors did with Clay or any of their guys who get injured, look, take your time. We'll wait until January. It's okay. And then Clay comes back, they win the championship. If Robert Williams, because remember there was a time in the playoffs when during these 7-game epics. I mean, it was like watching 4-hour movies like every week. It's like, I need to take a break. These 7-game series are so long, Kurt. Having Robert Williams for the entirety of that postseason healthy, I think would be huge for this team. And I'd much rather them do something like the Warriors with Clay than do what they did last year. Just throwing it out there. Yeah,
no, I agree. And he pushed through this, and then was asked about it this time and said, look, I got to play in the finals. I'm going to do that. I'm going to push through, but sometimes there's a price for that. And hopefully he bounces back, and literally bounces back the same guy, because his explosion in rim protection, like I said, is up there near the top of the league. He might have been one of my favorites to win Defensive Player of the Year before the injury. So,
I mean, it's pretty amazing to think 2 players, right, on the same team, right there in the conversation all season long, there towards to the end of the season. Now, I want to bring your attention to another situation in Phoenix. We talked about Robert Sarver, and we kind of did the premonition here that seeing the Atlanta Dream, what happened in WNBA, there was an inkling that it was going to happen with Phoenix as well, and that's exactly what happened. But the timeline was far faster than I think any of us expected. Within a week, Robert Sarver went from being a 1-year suspension, which was the second longest in NBA history, Adam Silver said during his press conference, just for context, and the maximum fine was $10 million, going a week later to selling both the Suns and the Mercury. One of the most vocal opponents of the initial decision was Chris Paul, the franchise player for the Phoenix Suns. Now, since the dust has kind of settled, and we know the team's being sold, and that's out of the way before the season starts, what do you think about this Phoenix Suns team? Do you think they can overcome the adversity and move forward with a championship?
Boy, I'm glad they've got Monty Williams at the helm, because this isn't the only adversity they're facing, right? Like, and this is, again, sort of like the Celtics, in the sense that, like, as names come up for who could be buying the team, like, this isn't something that's static. It is going to keep coming up. It's going to keep being an issue. It's possible they're sold before the end of the season. There's just a lot of moving parts there, and it makes it an ongoing distraction. But remember that Jay Crowder is not in training camp with them right now. He is out demanding a trade, which they have to look for. And then you've got DeAndre Ayton, who, Corey, I think you saw this video. He, let's say he didn't look thrilled with his contract and the situation upon his return.
I mean, how could you be in that scenario?
No,
I think you're onto something. Like the discontent, the layers of discontent in Phoenix are deep on that bench, and it is fascinating to me to see, especially Jay Crowder. I did not expect this, in the sense I know that we were expecting, him to. You've been telling me the past few months that's going to happen, but I'm saying, as far as like the idea, like especially with his tweet saying, you want to go play where you're wanted, from being one of the key cogs just a couple years ago to going into transitioning more into a bench role when the younger players started really playing well. That to me was kind of antithetical to what I had seen from Jay Crowder, just different teams he's been on. To me, he's always kind of been like the team first player, so that I was surprised to see that. And then DeAndre Ayton not understanding. I understand he's deviating from the jovial attitude he normally has and treating this like a business trip. And I get that. But I don't know if he fully understands the situation that like he's in, understanding like being the number 1 overall draft pick, or being a target, being a top draft pick, and then coming into this with all his peers signing these massive extensions, and then he has to reset his value. This is, it's you're gonna have to be a great teammate. Like, you don't want to repeat the same mistake that Kyrie is doing right now in Brooklyn, for instance. Where so it's just I don't understand what's happening in the locker room there, and this is all under the purview of Chris Paul, which is shocking too. Yeah,
and Chris Paul, and I mean, among your concerns, if you're a Suns fan, is Chris Paul turns, I think, 38 this season, which is that's something, right? Like, it's the Ayton thing is just, look back. It's kind of what Crowder said, right? Like, you want to be wanted, you want to feel needed, and I'm not sure he felt that. I'm not sure that they handled that part of this right. And it's a weird thing to say about a guy who just signed a 9-figure extension, right? Like,
I mean, but true. It's true. It's true.
That's a whole lot of money, generational wealth. And so, you're wanted, but I don't, he wasn't recruited. He wasn't told he's getting a larger role in the offense, which I think he actually will get some of this year. He's not feeling it. And I would be more down on this team if it didn't have Monty Williams as coach and Chris Paul, because I think they're the two guys who can right this ship emotionally. And there's plenty of time to do it. Where, it's a long season. This is a good team that's going to win a lot of games and obviously be in the playoff mix, even in a deep West. And so it's a matter of having this thing working when it matters, late in the season and into the playoffs. But they've got some work to do.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaways from this is that Boston is going to be okay. I think they're going to be actually okay versus the other teams, as far as expectations are concerned. And I think that Phoenix is going to be not okay. I think they're going to take a little bit of a dip. To me, I think we may have seen the best basketball from Phoenix just a couple of years ago. I think it's starting to get a little too unstable, and it's starting to really concern me. And I think that, especially now with this idea of the introduction of a new ownership, Kurt, we saw this happen in Utah. Like, this is not like, we don't have to go back in history here. I feel like if you say, okay, this is the roster we had, and we just signed Devin Booker to this massive extension. We got DeAndre Ayton back. We have Chris Paul for, like you said, a couple more years maybe. And we got close. We got to the finals. And then what happened around that? I think you're going to start seeing more pieces get peeled off, not just Jay Crowder. And then especially if you get new ownership, and they might take a different route with it. And I think it's going to be an interesting time. This is like a big year for Phoenix, and I don't think they're going to perform as well as we expect. That's my take.
No, I'm with you. I think that they're primed for a step back a little bit. And also, even if they're just as good as they were last year or 2 years ago, like, the West is better. They still won 64 games last year. I still think this is a really good team, but are they going to beat the Clippers or the Warriors or the Nuggets in a playoff series? I'm not convinced.
Or the Mavericks.
Or the Mavericks.